In a rather surprising vote this week, 5-4 vote by the U.S. Supreme Court, they actually denied a request by trade associations, landlords, and real estate companies to overturn the Centers for Disease Control's eviction moratorium that has been in place throughout most of the pandemic. This was good news for people who've been unable to pay their rent during the pandemic. Obviously, major blow to the people who own all the property in this country. But again, it was rather shocking that we did have a majority of this, court, which is overwhelmingly conservative, vote to uphold the eviction moratorium. And the reason for that is because the moratorium is set to expire in July. And Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who wrote the opinion, basically said that, listen, due to the fact that this thing's about to expire, we're just going to leave it in place for now. He did say that the Centers for Disease Control overstepped their authority in doing this. And he actually wrote that the, Public Health Service Act of 1944, which is what the moratorium, what basically gave the CDC the authority to put this moratorium in place. He said, the rules have changed, whatever, idiot Kavanaugh. So here's the thing. It's great that the moratorium has been upheld. The ruling from the Supreme Court says that they cannot continue the moratorium any longer after it's already set to expire. So that is a horrifying consequence here. So what needs to happen at this point? Well, I will explain that. We have millions of people in this country that have been unable to pay their rent during this pandemic. We saw obviously millions of people lose their jobs. The economy or jobs are coming back, I guess, a little bit at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. They're not paying enough, so people are still going to run into the same problems. Not to mention the fact that they don't just automatically start owing the rent that's due for that month. There's back rent, okay? We've done nothing about the backlog, and that's the problem. Even the moratorium, even if they extended it, it would still just be putting a Band-Aid on the entire problem facing millions of people. In fact, as the Supreme Court estimated, 30 to 40 million renters. Okay, 30 to 40 million people. Let's assume, obviously, not all of them have been unable to pay the rent, but let's assume it's 10%. So you're talking about 3 to 4 million people suddenly owe maybe up to a year's worth of rent. They don't have 30 grand just sitting in the bank that they've been holding on to like, all right, I guess I'll pay rent now. They don't have the means to pay this rent. So we could be looking at millions and millions of people kicked out of their homes, out of their apartments, out of their condos in a month and a half. Because there's no rent relief. So it's great that we have the eviction moratorium, but we have to have the second component, which is the rent relief. Without the second component, the first component is basically meaningless. You're prolonging the inevitable, and that is a massive economic crash due to millions of people suddenly being kicked out on the streets. And I know the landlords are anxious to kick people out so they can get other people in to start making that money, but guess what? If we have millions, suddenly millions and millions of empty units across this country, more units available than people available to rent them out, that causes a crash in that market as well. This whole thing has ripple effects throughout the entire United States economy. We are looking at this thing head on. We see the catastrophe coming, right? We know exactly what this is going to do. And we're just whistling Dixie here, just letting it happen. So the simplest thing for the federal government to do is provide rent relief to every single individual so that all of their back rent is paid. The federal government needs to pick up that tab. And oh my God, I know everybody's freaking out about that, but hear me out on a second. And that would also, not that they deserve it in some instances, but that would also provide some of these big, property owning mega corporations, essentially at this point, they'd get all their money too. So it's a win-win for everybody, including the greedy conglomerates that have been snatching up properties and renting them out for well more than they're worth. But you also, of course, do have the average everyday person who, maybe owns a second or third home and they say, hey, I'm going to rent it out. They need the money. I have no problem with those folks at all. It's just the super wealthy, the hedge funds that we know, like BlackRock, snatching up all of these houses and apartments to rent them out at higher values. Yeah, they can go to hell, but even still, I'm okay with them getting the relief in this particular instance if it prevents millions of people from getting evicted. So, how much is that going to cost, right, when I'm talking about the government giving away all this free fund money? Well, according to the federal government, as of December of last year, there was $70 billion of back rent owed in the United States. Not just due to the pandemic, but just in general, back rent. $70 billion. So that was 6 months ago. So, if we do their math, it would be what, at worst 105? Well, hell, let's say it's even double that. Let's say it's 140 billion. Big price tag, small compared to some of the other things the federal government does. Supreme Court, in their ruling, actually estimated it was about $200 billion in back rent that was owed. Okay, $200 billion. The government has that. That's what? A little over 25% of the yearly budget for the United States military? And we could prevent a massive economic collapse by making this one-time $200 billion payment? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that's a worthwhile investment because we know what's coming. And we know the government's not going to do the right thing on this. Let's go ahead and mark it on your calendars right now because in a month and a half, 2 months, whatever it is, I'm going to be sitting here telling you, I told you so.